Good work. Keep it up. And now it looks like we're recording. So the next thing I will do is share my screen. We'll just talk through a couple logistics first. So I left a note on the final paper topic. I put feedback on all of those that I received. So if you have questions or want to discuss it further, just let me know. This final paper is a little weird at first because it is so broad. We're picking something that we've worked on or talked about in the class and writing a research paper about it. So we'll take a look at that description real quickly. So I said it's broad, but in reality, it's actually a really exciting opportunity because you can pick what you're into. And we've all had to write papers and do projects on things that are dull to us, and it is not fun. So my hope is that you'll be able to really continue to hone in on your interest area and that it will make the paper much more enjoyable. Researching something that is fascinating to you, because we all have something, a topic or two that stick out to us. So if anybody needs help on that, I am here to help with picking that too. And if you need to adjust it, that's just fine. Hi, Emily.
Hi there. Sorry I'm late.
Okay, sorry. I'm so glad you're here. Emily, how's your week been?
Kind of interesting. I actually found out I have a torn ACL, so I'm gonna have to need surgery. So it's been an interesting week.
Emily, I'm so sorry. Are you in much pain?
No. I can pretty much walk normal. It's just internal things. So yeah, but I'm totally fine. Yep.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Well, we'll be praying for you. And if you want to talk about any deadlines that might be affected or anything, shoot me an email, okay?
I appreciate that. Thank you. Anyways, yes. So
I'm so sorry. Yeah, that's not good. So it'll be in our prayers for healing and for a good procedure. But we were just talking about the final paper a little bit because it's coming up faster than it may seem. 5 to 6 pages long. And we were talking about how picking a topic that is really interesting to you will make this go a lot faster and feel a lot easier and more enjoyable. And if anybody wants to shift the topic around from what they chose, that's fine too. Just let me know. And that it's good to hone in, not to be way too specific, because then it can be difficult to find enough research to support what you're talking about and to spread that into 5 and 6 pages. But if you have a topic that's too broad, that can be difficult too. So if somebody said, my topic will be mental health problems, I would say that's really great, but I think we should pick a type of mental health concerns. So a person could study anxiety disorders, and that could involve generalized anxiety disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, panic disorder, several different types of disorders. And somebody could dive into each of those and give some summary information and then move on to talk about causes, potential causes, treatments, etc. And then obviously tying in the biblical perspective after going through all that research. So that's an example of a topic that wouldn't be too broad, but wouldn't be too small. If I said that I want to do a research paper on an anxiety disorder related to a phobia of snakes, that's a pretty common phobia. You might actually be able to find a good chunk of research on that, but it's also so specific that it's not going to get you that big picture that you're looking for. So instead, you might do phobias in general and exposure treatments versus cognitive behavior therapy and what might be most effective. So that's just an example of how you might expand on a topic like that. And I did put up an announcement on that too. So for this week, week 10, we had the self-reflection paper. Does anybody have any questions on this paper and the questionnaire? Feel pretty good? Okay.
Are we doing like all the questions, right? Or are we just picking a few?
Good question. Yeah, you'll want to hit on all of these points. I know it's a lot. It is a 3 to 4 page paper. So that, just a couple paragraphs to each of these should be able to cover the 3-4 pages. Okay. And then you'll want the 2 outside resources, one of which can be the Bible. Okay. So I'm excited to hear about your results. Did you guys take those yet? Was it interesting?
Yeah, it was really interesting. Yeah, I found mine really interesting. I took one at the beginning of the week,
Mhm.
and this may have been like a mistake, I don't know. But I took one at the beginning of the week,
Yeah.
and it didn't really align exactly with how I would have viewed it. So
Mhm.
then I kind of like wrote some notes down about it, and then I took it again like 2 days or yesterday, and it was like completely different results. So it's
Yeah.
interesting. So now
Yeah.
I'm trying to decide kind of how to go about that.
Super interesting. And you just never know. Because, depending on your mood, right? And so these
Yeah.
scales, it's a cool tool to learn about yourself, but we all grow and change. And depending on what's going on a given day and how much sleep you got and how you're getting along with people, you might feel very differently.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a good point. Yeah. It's not a direct science, but it is just interesting to get a pulse on it. Next week, we'll take a look at here. We do have a discussion. You guys are very familiar with how to do these. And the information is about, here we are with nature and nurture again, but in particular, the concept of identity. So how has your identity changed over time or remained the same? Which examples from your own life or somebody else's relate to limitations or encouragement on personal change? So bottom line is, what factors inspire or promote change within a person with identity? A really good example of this would be becoming a believer and embracing Christian faith. That's a big change to the identity when we adopt the idea and the concept that we're children of God and that we're born again. That really changes our perspectives on everything. And we have this new life and this new guidance for us through the Spirit and through the Word of God. So I'm not trying to throw out answers, but that's a concept that could be relevant for this discussion, along with a lot of other factors you can think through. Even Emily, what you're going through right now, as the athletes, and oftentimes it's athletes who have injuries like that. Somebody in my life did as well. And I saw her go through so much with her identity of, during this recovery time, I can't do the sport that I used to spend every day doing and practicing and competing for. And so who am I when I'm not doing that? Kind of a feeling. And she eventually was able to return to it. But that event was a time for her to reflect on her identity and on the different skill sets and gifts that God had given her, instead of only that one thing for her to know who she was as a person. So kind of interesting how those life events can play into the concept of identity. And that could be things that have happened in your past or are going on in your present. So with that, if anybody has any questions, please speak up. And if not, we'll talk a little bit about emotion. Good? Okay, thanks guys, you're awesome. So emotion, we've been talking about emotional intelligence this week with what you're doing with your paper. So we're going to go through a few theories of emotion. And then before 3:30, I want to hit on the topic of stress as well. So I would guess that emotion and stress are relevant factors and topics for everybody on this call. All of us experience different emotions and sometimes emotional issues and challenges, and we all experience stress. I know that as hard as you guys are working and as great of a job that you're doing, being in a college level course can be stressful, and just approaching it, even mentally approaching a task before you've started it, there can be a stress factor there. So I'm really proud of you guys for all your hard work, and we'll hit on some of what stress does to the body. Emotion, the Merriam-Webster definition is here on the slide. You can see it's generally a strong feeling. It's a mental reaction, and it's generally directed towards a specific object. And there can be those physiological and behavioral changes as well. So object could be person, but it also could be an inanimate object, like a copy machine that won't work no matter what you do. And you start to feel an emotion, which could be anger or frustration towards the copy machine. And definitely it can occur even with a pet. I got a puppy. I think I mentioned that in my getting to know you. I got a puppy a little over a year ago, and I definitely felt emotions going through raising her and trying to train her. There were times that it was really frustrating. So emotion can apply across areas and across relationships. And to think about the positive side of emotion, the dog, actually, now that she's grown up, brings me a lot of happiness. So there are both sides. And oftentimes in our culture, emotion is judged as good or bad. So happy is a good emotion, but sadness is a bad emotion. And that's not necessarily the case, right? All emotions are healthy in their right capacity if they're not overtaking us and bringing us down. It would also be awful to be happy and excited and exuberant all the time. It would be exhausting. So think about emotion. Let's try to just remove a lens of a good feeling or a bad feeling. Sometimes we feel that it's wrong and bad to feel anger or frustration, and that's not true. You know, we think of Jesus in the temple. And so where that anger can go wrong or can go in the right way, in a spiritual way, is how we respond to it and how we manage it, what kind of communication we're using. So it's good to keep that biblical perspective in mind as well. Here is Ekman's work. This was the 1970s. 6 basic emotions that were identified. And you can see, do you guys see the visuals of these little guys?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I don't know if it's just my screen, but we are still on the Blackboard. So I don't know.
Yeah, same here.
Oh, sorry. Here.
No, you're good. I was just like, oh no, is this just me? Is my
Guys,
computer
so
glitching?
sorry. How about now?
There we go. Okay.
Forgive me. I'm so sorry. So now you
You're
can
good.
see the little colorful guys. Awesome. Okay, great.
Yeah,
We're all
yep.
on the same page. So these were the basic emotions that Ekman defined in the 1970s. And we'll look at a couple different theorists. So this is the first one. He did later add pride, shame, embarrassment, and excitement. And shame, interestingly, is a topic that has been very frequently studied in the field of psychology these days. So it's pretty interesting to think about how shame can affect us and our relationships as we're going through different crises, perhaps in our lives, or making mistakes, doing things that we regret. Shame can contribute a lot, as the research indicates, to addiction, for instance. And the shame perpetuates lying and secrecy, and then more use of the drug to relieve the feelings of shame and self-hatred and discomfort. And then, as we can see with the pattern there in addiction, more use of the drug leads to more shame, and then having to cover up those feelings. So addiction is just one example, but I wanted it to be on your radar. I'm sure you guys have heard and read about it a little bit too. Shame is a pretty hot topic in the field of psychology, and it's something that wasn't really operationally defined before. So that's something that Ekman added later to his theory of emotion. And there are 3 different main kinds of theories. I'm going to move our faces over. Hopefully you guys can see it. Physiological theories. So that would be the idea that our bodily responses are happening to, there's a stimulus presented to us, an object or a person or a situation. Our body is responding. So our heart rate's going up. Maybe if it's anxiety or fear, our breath is getting faster and shorter. Maybe our face is smiling if we're happy. And that those physical things are the causes of our emotions. You might hear that and be like, no, that's not true. I personally don't think it makes a lot of sense, but we have to look at all theories, even those that we don't agree with, or maybe are a little bit outdated, because it helps us to understand where we've come from. Neurological theories would be that neurotransmitters, chemicals, for instance, dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine, those chemicals in our bodies are the causes of our emotions. And then finally, the cognitive theory would be that our thoughts contribute to our emotional responses and reactions, and that those thoughts cause the experiences in our bodies. And we all can think about physiological reactions that we have to emotions. So if you think about the last time, if you were in a car, for instance, whether you were driving or somebody else was driving, if you came into a near wreck and you had to slam on the brakes, I think we've all been there at one point or another, and it is terrifying. And the heart rate goes up. It's generally shortly after that moment, because in the moment we're in that fight or flight response of really focused in on let's stay alive and keep my car safe and keep other people safe. And then shortly after that, when we've hit the brakes, the screeching sound is gone, traffic's moving on, that's when we might start to break a sweat. And our heart might be pounding and we might be gripping onto the steering wheel. And I'm like, I got to pull over. I'm thinking of a time that I experienced this. And that's where the physiological reaction is coming from. So in a cognitive theory, we're saying my thoughts about, wow, I could have hurt somebody, I could have gotten hurt, my car could have been totaled, I may have owed thousands of dollars, you know, any of those thoughts can lead us to those physiological reactions and ultimately the concept of hurting ourselves or somebody else. So before we move on, does anybody want to share regarding their perspective and which one of these, with the learning you've done so far, might make the most sense to you? You don't have to. We can just think on it.
I would probably say like the last one, maybe.
The cognitive. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of that makes sense and is supported by research. And it's also related to, as we've learned a lot about, cognitive behavior therapy. And in that therapeutic approach, we're trying to change our thoughts and to be conscious and aware of our thoughts, because the idea is that our thoughts lead to our feelings and our feelings lead to our behaviors and our actions and our internal experiences. So if you like the cognitive approach here, you may also like cognitive behavior therapy. Okay. Several other theories, the idea of evolutionary theory, this does relate to the work of Charles Darwin. Again, whether we agree with the theory or whether it aligns with the biblical perspective or not, we still got to look at it, because that way we get the well-rounded idea of what has been done in the field. So this theory would mean that our emotions dictate our survival. So the idea that Darwin was putting forward with this theory, and of course he was working a long time ago in the 1800s, and so this is a pretty old concept, but the idea would be that our emotions are part of what keeps us alive. So for instance, the idea of being in love. People like that happy feeling of connection and excitement over being with a person romantically and perhaps getting married. And so they say, oh, the celebration and happiness of a wedding day is what motivates people to partner and to mate and pair up for life. And then that is what facilitates our species. So the idea of kind of survival is in the work of Darwin. James Lang theory, this again, it's an older one. It's fairly quite old. It's 1800s. So late 1800s, this is two different people who formed this theory that the emotions occur because of our physical reactions. So sort of what we were hitting on before, our body responds to the stimulus. So let's say we saw somebody approaching us with a weapon. We're going to start shaking and sweating and, you know, sucking in the breath like that. I don't know about you guys, but even thinking about it in my head makes me a little anxious. So when the threat approaches us, we'll have a physiological reaction, and that reaction will cause thoughts in our head. I could die. I have to get out of here. Okay. So the body is reacting because of the stimulus. That's one theory. Another theory, Cannon-Bard, is basically the opposite. So they would say that the emotions come to us as a reaction to the stimulus. So if you see a person who you've had an argument with and don't get along with, and you don't want to see them, and you see them walking by, your emotions might be sadness or discomfort or anxiety or awkwardness or frustration and anger. And then the body senses your emotional state and then manifests symptoms related to it. So that's the difference. The Cannon-Bard theory would say that the stimulus causes the emotion, which causes the physical reaction. Okay, so the idea is talking about James Lang, these theorists are saying that we can have physical reactions without the emotion. So if I go for a really long jog, my heart rate's going to go up and I'm going to be kind of panting and breathing heavily and I'm going to be sweating. Does that cause me fear and anxiety? Hopefully not, although I don't like to jog, but it shouldn't, right? So that's the idea Cannon-Bard put forth, and this was in the early 1900s, so a little bit afterwards, that those physical reactions don't cause us emotion. So it has to be that emotion would come first. That's where that theory comes from. And then there's one other theory that we'll hit on here related to that, which is the two-factor theory. And the idea here would be that we have the stimulus, and then cognitively we tell ourselves, this is how I feel about it. So you slap a label on it. You see a bear, you think that's scary, that's dangerous. And then the brain, the thought, that cognitive aspect brings us to an emotional response, which would also manifest with a physical response. So several different theories, you'll keep learning about those as we go. The Lazarus theory, there are many, so I won't spend too much time on this one, but it's just the concept that the stimulus leads to a thought, and then the physical and emotional responses occur together. So if you're walking down a dark alley and you hear something, you think to yourself, I'm in trouble, and then you start shaking, and at the same time you feel the fear emotion. So you can see all these theories are basically looking at order. They're saying stimulus, thought, emotion, body response, or a mix up in the order of those. So these people are all sitting there trying to figure out what is emotion? Where exactly does it come from? This facial feedback theory states that emotions, our facial expressions will impact our emotions. So the idea here, if you guys have heard fake it till you make it, they say if you're nervous, put a big smile on your face, sit up straight. They say that in an interview, and you'll come forward with more confidence. So this theory would tell us that what we're doing with our bodies can help us to adjust our emotional experiences and sensations. What do you guys think? Interesting?
Yeah,
Definitely
it's
a
very
lot of
interesting.
theories
Yeah.
over
Yeah.
time. Like,
Yes.
whoa, just pick one.
I know. Yeah, I know. But it's kind of cool to think, what do you think? You know, and next time you get hit with something that makes you really happy or frustrated, can kind of think to yourself, what did I notice first? When did my body respond? And it'll help you to be a little bit more aware. So it's kind of cool to take into consideration. And then finally, before we wrap up for the day, we'll talk about stress and the body. Probably telling you something that you already know, because stress affects us physically quite a bit. And the popular idea of this in culture is like butterflies in your stomach before a test. But in reality, stress, especially if it's chronic and long-term, we have that cortisol constantly rushing through our bodies, can definitely cause some significant digestive issues. If our body is in the fight or flight response, all of our blood is rushing out to our limbs. We're getting ready for combat. We're freaked out and scared. And the last thing that our brain and our blood is going to, and our internal resources, is digestion. You're like, I could care less about that. I just got to get out of here. So if you're starting to feel that way and you get an upset stomach, that's because the body is no longer thinking about the stomach and the food's not moving through like it should be. All sorts of other issues, headaches, obviously. And sometimes that can come from muscle tension and experiencing that muscular skeletal, the effects of that stress, tensing up, not realizing we're doing it. If we're working on the computer for a long time, that's our biggest enemy right now, is just that hunching over the cell phone. If you get a little more mindful regarding devices, you'll notice the head is down a lot, and that's really hard on the muscles and the tendons. So that can develop into stress and ultimately into the headache as well. Heart issues, lots of these are short or longer term issues, but stress definitely does have a significant effect on the body. And there are lots of different kinds of stress, right? It's just like we talk about little t trauma and big T trauma. So little t trauma might be something just really unpleasant that happens to us in the day. Like our dog gets into a fight with another dog and it's upsetting and it stays with us. But big T trauma, or big S stress, would be something like, the sudden death of a loved one, and we saw it, some horrible event like that would affect us perhaps much more significantly. But all of those things are trauma, depending on where they fall in the scale. And all of those things would also include stress. So as you look at this list, do you guys see the reactions to stress list? Yeah, I'm betting that you can probably click off at least a couple of these, if not many of them, and say, yes, I have been there, and think of a time. We encounter in our society stress every day to some level. And this is where it's so important to be mindful in prayer. A verse that's been with me lately is Psalm 46:10, be still and know that I am God. He's not joking. And be still doesn't mean that you have to sit there in the dark for 30 minutes and just pray and meditate on scripture, which would be really great to do. But as we know, we can't do that all the time. So be still could be 30 seconds at a stoplight of really just casting our cares on him. And that can relieve a lot of this stress. That's what the Spirit is with us for. And sometimes when life gets too chaotic, it's easy to forget that God is our first resource. Prayer should be our first response, no matter what's going on in our lives. And our culture often doesn't reinforce that. So, as we wrap up, this is a good list thinking about, you guys have your own personal ideas, I'm sure, if you reflect upon a time that has been severely and significantly stressful for you in your life. You might think about, oh yeah, I was just breaking down crying for no reason. Or, oh yeah, I just couldn't eat. I didn't have an appetite. Or usually I'm such a good sleeper, but I just lay down at night and stared at the ceiling and it was 3 o'clock in the morning. The body really is impacted by stress. Okay. So Bessel van der Kolk is a researcher on trauma and stress, and he recently released a book called The Body Keeps the Score. You might have heard of it. It's actually not too recently. It's been a while, but he does update it, and still there's more information coming out on it, the effects of trauma and stress on the body. And there really are a lot of short and long-term effects like those that we've talked about: dizziness, lightheadedness, upset stomach, body aches, back aches, headaches. People unfortunately can end up in urgent care or in the hospital due to a stress breakdown. And maybe you've experienced that or know somebody who has. So remaining in the word, remaining in prayer, obviously those are our greatest weapons to combat the stress that we experience now and the stress that we experience in the future. Okay, so as we wrap up, any questions? We've just got a discussion next week, really straightforward. You guys feel pretty good? Awesome. Well, enjoy the weekends. For the discussion, remember the source citation. Text is usually the easiest to cite, and then the scripture citation. That's important. So those things can support your statements and make that discussion a lot more rich. Cool.
I had a quick question on the final paper. Is it more of a formal paper or more of a like our view kind of things?
Great question. So it is a formal paper because you're going to want to go through all the research that you find. In the end, you're doing the biblical perspective. So you're bringing in the scripture to discuss the topic. So if you want to bring in some of your ideas there, especially with the biblical connections in mind, that's great. But majority is just going to be your research.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, great question. It's never too early to get started. So if any of you have any kind of spring break time or anything like that, go for it. It might be relieving some stress later on, as we just talked about stress. All right. Thanks, guys. We'll see you later.
Awesome. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.